All right, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on FAFSA First, requiring a FAFSA for high school graduation. My name is Sarah Pingle. I'm a senior policy analyst at ECS. I know many of the folks that registered for this webinar, and I think you all know me to be the kind of resident state affordability wonk at ECS, and so I'm super excited to talk about this emerging policy area with all of you today, and to run through some of the current policy landscape, and then give the bulk of the time on our webinar today to the state of Louisiana to share their story with the policy. Oh, just a sec, we're having an issue getting our slides to advance. All right, thanks for hanging in with us, guys. So I'm going to just really quickly cover who ECS is, for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, cover really quickly the current landscape of pending policies and policy design trends, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the bulk of our time today, we'll be hearing the story from Louisiana on the implementation of this policy. We're also going to have plenty of time for Q&A. We're going to leave our Q&A for the end. You'll see a feature at the bottom of the screen where you can submit those questions, and we'll be supporting those throughout the end. So just so that you know, my name is Sarah Pingle, Senior Policy Analyst at ECS. I'm joined today by Shaniqua Broom, who's a policy researcher on our team. And the both of us are here to continue to support each of your states as you continue on this journey with considering this policy idea. So please do feel free to jot down our names, our contact information, and we're here to help and share information about this topic. At ECS, we really believe in the power of learning from experience, and so every day we provide unbiased research and analysis to support state leaders in getting the information that they need to make the best decisions possible. We do this in a few different ways by providing research, reports, counsel, and convenings like the one today to support folks in their decision-making processes across the country. Many of you are probably also familiar with our policy tracking activities, and maybe you've even visited our policy tracking map on our website, ecs.org. And we touch, as a team, every single piece of education-related legislation across all 50 states and try to do our best to provide timely information and analysis to support folks as those bills move through the legislative process. And so this webinar is kind of one artifact of that effort today. So to give a quick landscape of state policies, this includes all of the bills that we've tracked at the Education Commission of the states related to requiring completion of the free application for federal student aid as a requirement for high school graduation. You'll see that there are 3 states that are enacted: Texas, Louisiana, and Illinois. A key distinction is that Louisiana was not a bill that passed. It was rather a regulatory change, and we'll hear more of that later today. There are many states where such a policy is pending right now: California, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, and several others as well. And then in the last legislative session, Michigan and the District of Columbia both had policies that failed. And our understanding is that things are still very much moving in those geographies, but that, when you look at the policy tracking, at least in the bills, there isn't a current bill moving right now, is our understanding. But this area is changing all the time, and this map was only current as of the 24th. And so, please do maintain communication with us as we continue to track this emerging policy area. As you read through these bills, there are several policy trends that emerge that I just wanted to share quickly with everyone. It's just kind of an overarching way to think about the issue. Most of the state policies that have been introduced or considered address issues of governance. And that manifests in a few different ways. The first, really, what kind of high schools should the policy apply to? Certainly, there's kind of a de facto understanding that it would be public high schools, but some of the state bills that have been proposed have special treatment of charter schools or even private schools in the ways that those types of institutions and types of schools should be required to comply with the policy. Some of the state bills are very specific about giving regulatory authority to another agency or agencies to implement the policy. And some state bills are really silent on the issue and really consider the bill to be, everything that's needed to implement that out. This is probably really an artifact of the state's overall governance structure for K-12 and post-secondary education. But thinking through who has the authority to write the regulations is key, because it's most often at the regulatory level that decisions about who can opt out are made, and who is eligible to waive out, and who has to implement that waiver process. That is most often where we see that, that piece kind of delineated out is at the regulatory level. So making a decision around who gets to do that is pretty key. Also, finally, as it concerns governance, there are several states that specifically speak to data reporting and mandating the collection of that data, where it should go and what data it should contain. There are a lot of third-party organizations that collect data around the share of high school students that complete the FAFSA. And the public, usually they're using public-facing sources of data to do that, but in reality, nobody can measure this better than you in your state departments. And so thinking through how that data should be reported and to who should get it and what data it should contain is really key. Most states are set up to receive FAFSA data for folks that live in that state that submit a form, but not all states are. And so that has some pretty key consequences as well when it comes to monitoring the progress of the effort. We get, so far in this session, we've gotten a lot of questions about waivers and opt-outs. It is most common across the bills that we've analyzed so far that these groups can either can waive out the policy. And they usually don't specify any kind of conditions. So if for any reason a parent doesn't want to do it, most of the state bills have said a parent can waive out of that requirement, whether that's by writing a statement on their own or filling out some sort of form or waiver process that's set up either at the school or the district level. Many students will turn 18 within the course of their senior year of high school, and many of the bills that we've read so far at ECS provide that flexibility for students themselves to waive out if they are over the age of 18. And several of the bills also provide specific language that students who are emancipated minors can opt out on their own without needing anybody else to help them, support them in that process or to verify their eligibility to opt out. And then there are other states that conceptualize the opt-out process as not originating from the student or family, but rather by being initiated by the schools or by a school official. So a superintendent, a school board, a district, and then even getting really granular into principals or counselors have all been specified across the different bills that have been introduced as folks that are eligible to waive out that requirement, but more on behalf of a student, right? Whereas the first three were really the student or the family driving the change. There's a distinction there between some states that require the waive outs to be driven by school staff. And the conditions that they can waive the requirement, these have really run the gamut across the country. Some state bills have been very, very permissive and have said that, we're not going to ask any questions, but if for whatever reason a student or a family or a counselor feels that a particular student couldn't fill out the requirement, then that's fine. Some have provided written in waive outs for students who are foster youth or undocumented students, for example. And then some states, and this is probably the broadest flavor that we've seen so far articulated in some of the legislation, provides an automatic waiver if the student has met every other requirement for high school graduation, that they wouldn't allow the FAFSA to be the only reason why a student didn't cross the stage and receive their diploma. So the conditions also vary across the policies that we've seen so far. And so just finally to wrap up before I hand it over to the Louisiana team, I wanted to provide just a few considerations. As Shaniqua and I have been reading these bills and thinking through these issues, we think that there are some key considerations that states may do well to keep in mind. The first is really what FAFSA submission means versus FAFSA completion. This sounds like it's a pretty cut and dry issue. You either submitted a FAFSA or you didn't. But many of us who are engaged, certainly in student-facing work, but also in the nitty-gritty of the FAFSA know that it's certainly not as cut and dry. Are you requiring that form to be signed by the student and parent? Are you going to require a student aid report to be generated, right? At what point in that submission process will you consider the requirement filled? because there's some gray area there with whether or not the form has been completed. We also believe that states should consider the intersection with institutional level admissions and awarding processes. And this I mean on the post-secondary side. So certainly when you fill out a FAFSA successfully, and if you receive a student aid report, you're going to know if you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant or not. But as many of us know, that's only a piece of the puzzle. It's not necessarily going to include information about institutional aid that the student might receive, or state aid that the student might receive, or cost and what that really looks like against that Pell Grant. And so the FAFSA is certainly a piece of the affordability picture, but as this policy is intended to increase information to inform decision-making for students, it is only a piece. It's not the whole picture of what a family is going to pay for college. We also believe that states should do really well to think through outreach and support for the policy. So it's one thing to pass the legislation or the regulation that's needed to enact this type of policy, but without outreach and support, the implementation will definitely be hindered, right? So how are states going to use either existing or new channels to talk about FAFSA completion and to encourage FAFSA completion across high school students? We also believe that there is more work to do in terms of supporting students that do opt out. And this would be especially true for more vulnerable student populations, such as undocumented students or foster youth or students that are impacted by the justice system. Those students that can't complete a FAFSA or that opt out of completing the FAFSA or feel that the risk is too great to fill out a FAFSA doesn't mean that they don't still need support when it comes to navigating college affordability and kind of the financial piece of making a transition between post-secondary or between high school and post-secondary education. So thinking through targeted supports that can be provided to those students is really key. We also believe that there's work to be done when it comes to providing equitable support to school districts and implementing the policy and making sure that every school district within the state has what they need to provide that outreach and support for implementation of the policy effort. And then second to last here, I wrote, impacts on state financial aid programs. The top question that we are getting at ECS from state higher education and financial aid agencies about the change of this policy is what impact did it have on the state financial aid program? We know that many of our state aid programs already are underfunded based on the number of students that would be eligible to receive the funds. In most states, state financial aid does not operate as an entitlement. It is a limited pool of dollars. And so if the policy to require FAFSA completion for high school graduation functions as intended, there should be more stress put on these state aid programs, and thinking through what that stress looks like, what to expect in that next year after implementation in terms of who's going to be eligible for the program is really key. And of note, out of all of the bills that we've read so far related to adding this requirement for high school graduation, none of them have addressed this at the legislative level. That might be okay, right? Not every state addresses state financial aid program policy at the legislative level, but many of them do. And so thinking through that piece is really key. And then the final one I wanted to conclude on is really that language matters. This is not a universal FAFSA. It's not FAFSA for all. And the reason for that is that not every student can fill out a FAFSA. Students who are involved in the justice system especially, or students who are undocumented, or students who may be involved in the foster system that don't have access to parent information. These are all key student groups that need to be reached with this type of effort that certainly aren't immune to the challenges of facing college affordability issues. And so as we think about those outreach and support efforts, the language that we use to talk about this, I think, is really key and really matters. And thinking through, a policy that's described as a universal one, and then being an undocumented student in a school, what's the impact of using that language and feeling like you may be obligated to fill out a form that you believe would put yourself or your family at risk? Or knowing, as a student who may have had prior involvement with the justice system, that you're not eligible to fill out the form. And now, to hear something like a universal FAFSA or a FAFSA for all effort put there and know that you're not eligible to receive those funds, what kind of messaging does that send? And so we really do believe that the language matters, especially the language that faces students in high schools. So with that, I know I've thrown quite a bit at all of you. We are going to transition over to the Louisiana story. I just want to highlight, that ECS is still here to provide support on this policy. And so as you have a need for further analysis of either your bill or a comparison to other states' bills or advice on a bill draft, we're happy to provide those perspectives to you. And certainly, the contact information for Shaniqua and I were available at the top of the hour. So I'm going to introduce really quickly our speakers from Louisiana. I am really just grateful that they were willing to take the time not only to deliver this presentation today, but to prepare it. We approached them several, probably a month or two ago, because we had a pretty critical mass of, I want to say, close to like 30 to 50 people who had asked questions of ECS about this policy. And we didn't just want to refer them all straight to Louisiana and flood those inboxes, but we did want to find a concerted way to make sure that states had the opportunity to hear the journey of Louisiana as they move through this policy, since they are the only state that is as far as they are in terms of implementation. So today on the webinar, we're going to be hearing from a few different leaders within the state from the Office of Student Financial Aid. Dr. Boutte is here with us to talk through how the Office of Student Financial Assistance has implemented this work. And she's partnered with Dr. Tarika Cobb, Ms. Ebony Holmes, and Ms. Brittany Williams, who are here to share the story from the Office of Student Financial Assistance perspective. We also have Stephanie Markham joining us from the Department of Education. I think one of the things you'll hear from Louisiana as they move into their presentation is that partnerships and working as a team has been really key to implementing this effort. And so we're excited to have kind of some cross-organizational support in today's webinar. And so with that, I will hand it over to the Louisiana team to share a bit of their story. And it looks like we already have some questions rolling in, so please do feel free to continue to submit those questions as you have them. And as I said, we'll get to as many as we can at the end.
So Ebony, it looks like I have you in the room. Are you all ready to go?
This is Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you as well.
Okay.
Looks like Ebony is still muted.
So Ebony, it looks like I have you in here twice in the room, and it shows that you're connected via phone line. Are you all set to go?
If you want to try to get with Ebony, the first part is really about the state policy that the Louisiana Department of Education implemented, and I can speak to that.
Great. We will have you kind of jump into that, and I will work with Ebony.
Good.
Okay, I can speak to this from the Department of Education standpoint. This policy was implemented not legislatively, but this was actually implemented in school graduation requirements and state education policy by our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And this really started in Louisiana when the Department of Education formed a pretty large financial aid working group. This working group consisted of people who were in all ways had an interest in students and their financial well-being when it came to college. It consisted of Department of Education staff, policy people, specialists on our team. It also consisted of LOSFA, Louisiana's Office of Student Financial Assistance. It consisted of representatives from post-secondary institutions and their financial aid offices, the Board of Regents, just across the board, people who would have an interest in this. And the very first thing we did was formulate this group, which started out to have quite a large number of members. And this group met and they decided that FAFSA rates in Louisiana were at an abysmal rate. And what could we do to raise them? And many things came out of those conversations, but the thing that really led the catalyst for change was that they decided that there did need to be some type of policy put in place to encourage financial aid financial aid planning, not just the completion of the FAFSA, but we have a financial aid planning policy. And so this group still meets quarterly. It's a much smaller group now, but they still meet quarterly, and we still discuss trends around the state and ways to improve areas that have historically seen low rates and various things going on in the financial aid world. So the first thing that happened was the financial aid working group met, and I won't read to you because you can read the bullet points, but like I said, there are many stakeholders in that group. There are parents, superintendents, financial aid experts, higher ed reps, but we wanted to ensure that parents and students and school systems had a forum to provide feedback and had supports. So we organized this group. It's a very diverse group of stakeholders with interest. And we developed a state action plan. That group came out with an action plan, which when you get the presentation, you can go and see. There are many things. Like I said, this is not just about FAFSA completion. It is a financial aid access policy. And there are many charges that this group gave, which you can read about. One of the things that came from it was also enacting the policy. And so you can read that. And this group also annually, actually I head that up, we publish a state of financial aid in Louisiana each year. And interesting, when we get to the policy, I will speak a little bit about the submission versus completion thing, because that actually is a thing in Louisiana. So FAFSA completion is not the only thing that the Department of Education has done. If any of you who have worked in education for a long time or done a lot of educational research know that when you implement anything new, it does take time to see true results from that. In the first year of implementation of anything new or different, it's not necessarily going to have the impact you want. The impact we want is to increase post-secondary access and the amount of kids accessing post-secondary, whether it be 4-year, 2-year, some type of just an adult credential, some type of proprietary school degree. We just want to increase that statewide. So this is part of a larger plan in Louisiana. Financial aid access is part of that plan. We also have a dual enrollment task force, which is going on where we're trying to increase dual enrollment in high school to give kids a better chance of being exposed and going on to 2- or 4-year or credentialing. We also have a work-based learning task force that meets, and we also have a program called Jumpstart in Louisiana, which is about career education and career diploma and planning for career and technical education. So the financial aid access is just part of a larger strategy in Louisiana to increase post-secondary access. So the policy, there are 4 ways that a Louisiana high school senior can be eligible to graduate under the financial aid access policy. The first of which is to submit the FAFSA. The second is you can just strictly apply for our state scholarship program, TOPS, which LOSFA will speak about because they own that. You can fill out the TOPS online application, and that meets your graduation requirement. You can submit an opt-out or non-participation letter, and that does have to come from a parent or guardian. or if you are 18 or older, you can submit that letter for yourself. Or the final way that you can be eligible to graduate is to receive a waiver through the school system. The school system has to send a waiver asking for the permission. It actually states the state superintendent of education gives the permission to waive. And that is what we refer to as a hardship waiver. And that is when you have situations like undocumented students or kids who you're unable, for whatever reason, do not have parental contact and are unable to garner the information that they need, or you know, an extenuating circumstance that a school system can petition on behalf of the student to have a hardship waiver. If you look in Louisiana at our data, we do have some waivers, not a lot, but we have a very small amount of hardship waivers in our state. The majority of the waivers that we receive are parental opt-out waivers. So how do you opt out? Well, you can fill out a non-participation form. This does have to be filled out by a parent or guardian or a student of the age of majority. And we have a sample online, and you can see the form here that a school system uses. These forms do have to be kept on file because when graduation audits are done of school systems, they do assure that these forms are kept on file in order for the kid to be eligible to graduate, which counts in school accountability points. So if there is a kid who has received an opt-out waiver, but it cannot be proven through the actual physical waiver, a school would, that kid would be considered a non-graduate in accountability. So schools do a really good job of maintaining these waivers. You can also receive a waiver through the school system. The actual waiver says that it has to be approved by the state superintendent. We do have a sample online, like I said, but we also take any form that a school district, some school districts create their own forms, and we do accept those forms as well. And this is in a situation where a parent or legal guardian or an 18-year-old student is unable to waive themselves out or is ineligible to fill out the FAFSA for whatever reason that might be. We don't want it to prohibit anybody from graduating. So we don't want any kid not to graduate because they haven't met the requirements. So there is a remedy for each of those situations, but in Louisiana, there must be a piece of paper if the kid does not fill out the FAFSA or the TOPS form. So now I'll turn it over to LOSFA.
Okay, can you hear us okay?
Yes, it seems like your audio is coming through now.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk about the finance portion of it. And I know, as you mentioned, many times legislation does not include how something is financed. But what we're showing you here is what we do at LOSFA to be able to keep policymakers, legislators, legislative staffers, our board members informed about changes that we see in financial aid programs. In other words, the impact on the state's fisc. When you look to the graphic to the left, you will see that our largest program for state financial aid is the TOPS program. That is a merit-based program, and Stephanie alluded to that. You'll notice that what we've had to break out is that there were several different factors. As ECS mentioned above, it's not just about the FAFSA. It's about filling out the FAFSA. It's about student preparation. It's about students getting in a rigorous curriculum. So all of those are benchmarks of the TOPS program. Students are required to complete a rigorous high school curriculum. students are required to be able to either fill out the FAFSA or the online application for TOPS, so that ACT score that equates to more financial aid actually incents students not only to complete the core, but to complete the ACT as many times as they can, and also to be able to achieve a GPA that merits the award. So here you'll be able to see that when we began to see not only increases in the FAFSA, and you'll see that that's our second component, that began to influence how many students were actually maybe changing their minds about coming to college. But at the very same time, with those aspirations increasing, we began to see more students qualifying for the higher award levels of performance and honors. We began to see, as students got more prepared, took this more seriously, saw that it's realistically for them to be able to go to college, you began to see more students retain the award. So again, students staying in the state to go to school, students retaining the merit-based award, more students saying, hey, college is possible, I feel like I have a way to pay for it. So this is the type of metric that we provide to policymakers, and what we're doing is equating those changes in student behavior to the dollars and to how the state uses a projection model to factor that in. So that's to the left. To the right, our need-based aid program is a significantly smaller program that we have, but again, no less important. So how do you get across to policymakers the fact that you don't have enough money for the amount of students that would be eligible for need-based aid? Keep in mind, a student can get the merit-based aid scholarship program as well as the need-based aid scholarship program, because the GO grant that's featured on the right is for students who also receive Pell. So what we did here is to enlist the help of the Louisiana Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, the aid administrators at each campus. We do a survey with them each year that says, okay, look at the packaging policy that you have right now. Why do the schools have a packaging policy? Because there's not sufficient funds to be able to fund every student that's eligible for a GO grant. And we ask them, how much more money would you need if you were going to fund all of the students that come across as eligible based upon your packaging policy? Then we ask them to respond to, okay, if you didn't have to have a packaging policy because funding was sufficient, then tell us how much more money you would need if you were going to fund all students who were eligible for a GO grant on your campus at the maximum award level, which is $3,000. So this also informs policymakers and staffers, and this also forms the basis for the budget request increases that we ask. Both of these documents would inform those budget requests that we send to our board and then get passed on to the legislative session, to the legislators during this session. Next. Stephanie mentioned outcomes in the TOPS online data application, that it was one way that a student would be able to opt out. I think the great thing about this partnership is when the Department of Education started discussing with us that this is a policy that we're going to enact, I think the critical thing is that the actions that we took, we did not wait in the state of Louisiana until it was enacted and until it was a requirement. We actually started looking and doing actions and doing pilots before the policy was enacted. One of the things we were able to do, because left was talking to right and collaborating, is say, if you're going to provide opt-outs, the FAFSA is already the application for TOPS in the state. That was that way before the FAFSA policy was put into effect. We already have an alternative way for a student to apply for the TOPS scholarship that instead of the FAFSA. Again, that TOPS online application, the caveat that we have there, a very important one, it's written on the form, it's written on the application, and we say this is only for parents who, if called upon, can demonstrate that you are not going to qualify for any federal financial aid. So we didn't want students to be able to say, oh, well, I just don't want to do the FAFSA, or I think it's too complex, or so I'm going to use this as an excuse for, like, no, the only folks that should be filling out the TOPS online application are the students who know their families are not going to qualify for aid, and if called upon, you can demonstrate that. You'll see that in that implementation year, you did have a slight uptick. Right now, numbers are still coming in for 2019-20. But again, that was already an option. But when the department did its opt-out or optional ways to apply, that because of the collaborative efforts, that option was included as one, so that we were able to appease those folks that already said, well, I already know, I can already do this. So you eliminated some conflict before that began. Now I'm going to turn it over to, if you can go back to that, to Ebony and Brittany on our team, to talk about the FAFSAs completed and how we roll out those online applications to students. Ebony?
So this is Ebony, and so looking at the information on the screen, you'll look at the TOPS online applications. This was broken out by school year, and of course, as Dr. Boutte just explained, this was in place for students. They have that option to either do that TOPS online application if they know they're not going to qualify for any federal aid. And so what you see is that starting with the 17, 18, and this is going to be broken out by school year, so this is 18, 19, and of course for pending 2020 grads, you'll see the numbers up there for the number of TOPS online applications that we received, and this is after the policy was enacted. Of course, for 2019, 2020, as also mentioned, we are still waiting on those numbers to come in, and we'll look at those numbers up until the end of June.
And so the FAFSA data is capturing basically the completion of the FAFSAs. And so I will mention that with the mandate, our mandate requires that students submit the FAFSA. But we know that a submission is not always a completion. And so sometimes what a student can do is they may submit the FAFSA, but it may be missing some key components that's needed to accurately process and have Title IV funds be drawn down upon. And so a full completion, meaning that the FAFSA has something in each portion of the FAFSA, and that it will be able to draw down federal aid from. Now, with this data, what I gave you was a snapshot of in the FAFSA cycle. So, for example, the first bullet point in blue is actually showing you the year prior to our mandate going into place. And so this would be the 16-17 school year, but the seniors that year were completing the FAFSA, the 17-18 FAFSA. At that time, according to NCAN, or the National College Attainment Network, our FAFSA completion rate was 51.2%. And then in the first year of our FAFSA mandate being in act, we jumped 25%, 25.9% to be exact, and in FAFSA completions, just due to our efforts and best practices that we had developed in that year prior that we will speak to a little bit later. And then now to move down to our current year, our students are completing the 2020-2021 FAFSA, and as we know, these numbers are still coming in, but we can see now every year we've increased in completion. We're reaching more and more students where the outreach is growing larger and larger, and as to date, we can see that we are number one in the nation for increase in FAFSAs from the last FAFSA cycle to this FAFSA cycle. So this is some data, and we've provided you guys the data source. This actually comes from our partners with the Louisiana Department of Education, and this gives you a snapshot of who was completing the FAFSA, or who were submitting the FAFSA, what were our students' demographics, what did they look like across the board, and this is statewide. And Stephanie, I'll let you speak to this slide.
Yeah, so the last slide, if you could just go back to it, I will speak about this. Our focus is on completion. And so we work very closely with school systems, and we look at error rates, and we look at the kids who are on the list with errors, and we try to get them to complete, but the graduation requirement is to submit. So the State Department public schools have to put in our transcript system if the kid has completed the FAFSA, the TOPS form, has done a parental opt or 18 or over opt-out waiver, or if they have done a hardship waiver. So we have documentation. Now, note that in Louisiana, we do have a pretty moderate private school population, of which we have no data at the department. At the department, this is strictly public school data. But this is some subgroup data that was taken on submissions for public school students only, not the private school students. And so this is the data we got, which we are pleased with in many aspects. We're looking to improve on it because in a lot of areas we don't see subgroups of students doing well, but we do see that there is, we're seeing more equity in the submission of the FAFSA. So we have a whole analytics team that does data. And so what we are looking for is we are looking for, 3 to 5 years out to see an increase. We want to see results. Like I said, the first year you implement anything in education, you rarely see grand results. It usually takes a while. So this is not an exercise, an individual exercise. This is part of a larger plan of things that we are working with at the department, with LOSFA, with the Board of Regents, with higher ed institutions, and trying to increase and make this stick for kids. And so our data department just pulled me some data on the number of seniors we've had over the years from 2012 to 2018, and also the number of first-time freshmen. We have seen the number of first-time freshmen increase, but we've also seen the number of seniors increasing. So we're hoping to see through some of our other initiatives a sharper increase in the number of first-time freshmen.
And so with this slide, how did the policy impact our work? And so I'm showing you already what the data looks like as far as the increase in completion, and this is definitely due to a lot of the outreach efforts that we do with our partners. And so specifically with our office, within our field outreach and public information communication divisions, you can see a year-to-year difference where the first year that the mandate was in place, we had a bit over 11,000 events that we facilitated, and those included FAFSA completions where we actually go out to the schools or go out to a location. It did not have to be a school. It could be libraries, churches, things of that nature. And we would sit with our students and our families and actually complete the FAFSA with them. But we also provided our schools with the opportunity to invite us out to just talk about the FAFSA and get our parents acclimated to what they could expect and alleviate a lot of the myths that come along with FAFSA completion. And again, it did not only have to be at the schools. We provided outreach just anywhere that our families needed us to be. We definitely reached them. And so with this past school year, the 18-19 school year, we saw a very large increase in the financial aid events and our workshops and completions. Next slide.
Great. Yeah, next we're going to talk about the outreach pilot that we did.
Hi, I'm Tarika Cobb, and we were very pleased to actually be part of the National College Attainment Network, their pilot program. We were actually one of the grantees who actually, in their first actual grant to increase FAFSA completion to cities, that was actually funded by the Kresge Foundation. We were one of the cities in Louisiana to actually be a part of that grant. And it couldn't come at a more perfect time. So this was targeting the 16-17 school year. The cities were already identified by the Kresge Foundation and NCAN, and we wrote the grant along with our partners at the Louisiana Department of Education and other community partners and state partners we had, and we were fortunate to get that grant. And one of the things that we knew that was so important about getting this grant is that the policy would go into implementation that very next year. So the policy, actually having a chance to pilot, mandated FAFSA completion, a focus on FAFSA completion, what works, what does not work, best practices, was very timely for us. That pilot was actually done here, where our office is headquartered here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so it was with the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. There were 11 high schools that were involved in that, and the goal of the actual grant was to make sure that we were actually strengthening the urban ecosystem. So that was very important because it does take a village to make sure that our students are going to and through college. Finally, the other thing I wanted to say about this on this slide is during the campaign, we were very pleased that we did reach our goal. We were one of the cities during the campaign that actually reached the goal. So you may say, well, what outreach events did we facilitate? So very important. Professional development was very important. Okay, so we realized through our interactions with our schools that, you had our staff members in the schools on one spectrum who wanted to be a facilitator in terms of learning how the FAFSA works hands-on, to those who basically wanted to be kind of like a guide to point their students in the right direction. So we made sure we had PD for all at different levels and made it very convenient, some face-to-face and some actually web-based as well. So varying our professional development was important. We learned that from our pilot. Also, comprehensive mentoring, very powerful tool. So we have a Trailblazer support leadership program here. Those are usually high school seniors that actually work with our students in our schools. We train them in leadership. We train them in college access. And that program evolved into a FAFSA ambassador program. So through this pilot, we actually created FAFSA ambassadors. So in all 11 schools, you had at least one FAFSA ambassador. Those ambassadors, we brought them in. We did PD with them on, okay, what is the FAFSA? Why is it important? What does it mean to be an ambassador at your school? And, they were not the experts on the FAFSA, but they were the experts on how to reach their peers and to get their peers involved. This was very important because they would tell us how to reach their peers, what type of giveaways that we could actually solicit from our community partners, which was very important to us in this work, and it still is today. Next, we actually learned about all kinds of FAFSA financial aid events that work well with our schools. So office hours, our federal student aid office does office hours. We learned to do our own office hours when FSA weren't doing it, coupling office hours on days that FSA wasn't doing office hours, where we could actually support our events in the field. Also, one-on-one support. Number one, making sure that we could provide one-on-one support in various forms. Concentration events, that was another type of event where we would have students complete the events in the day and parents come and complete the events at night. And having some type of child care assistance there at night, if you can couple with community partners and having some type of snacks. We had a grant that was very important. Lock-in events. So not necessarily literal, but you know, when it's time to check those students out at graduation, they could actually hold them up and say, hey, you need to actually take care of this FAFSA before you can participate in this. We also coupled with things like the basketball tournament, things that our schools already had in place, where the students would compete on the court and they would actually compete with the FAFSA. So we were we tried to couple with what the schools already had. We did community block parties with our libraries. We also did text messaging, very important, meeting students where they are. So reminding them through text messaging, and they would reach out to us a lot more than our initial emails. We also did financial literacy for you, a theatrical event, and we still do those as well. And definitely with the true nature of competition, we do have a data dashboard. So it's our Compete to Complete portal, which we use funding from the actual grant to create this dashboard, where schools could actually see where they actually landed in their in FAFSA completion. So who did we serve? So for the grant, we served 12th graders. These are the schools, and I'm very careful when I show you this list of schools. At the top, you see that's a magnet school. And at that particular magnet school had, when we brought all our ambassadors in, that school had a pretty, a really high FAFSA completion rate, in the beginning. And you know how it is, you can always improve. But it was very important when we brought our ambassadors in, because you had one end of the spectrum with a school that has a really rich college-going culture that's a part of this campaign, and then those who are, aspiring to have a great college culture at their school. So bringing those students in, and then those ambassadors could tell us, well, this is how you can get more students at my school completing the FAFSA, and the ones who didn't have the college-going culture, they could tell us the same about their school as well, and how to reach their students.
So how did we track our school performance? Dr. Cobb just mentioned our Compete to Complete portal, and basically what we did with this portal, we used NCAN's Form Your Future FAFSA Tracker as a guide. And as you know, FSA releases data on a weekly basis, and then biweekly over the summer, they release data on FAFSA completion nationwide, and then you can do it by state. You can pull it by state. And so that was our numerator for our tracking. And then for our denominator, we used our senior enrollment counts that Louisiana Department of Ed published twice a school year. And we put this information into a portal, and I'll give you a picture of it in just a bit, but basically the schools use this portal to track their performance, and they also used it to fuel a few of their rival competitions. And so what we found is that we would see certain schools within a district trying to beat out each other, or they would be at the event, trying to see where the other schools were so that they could, encourage the students. It became a friendly part of school rivalry, and they would encourage their students that they had to beat out the other school, and so that would excite the students. And this was something that I updated as often as the Federal Student Aid Office published the information on their site.
And I can say, as recent as a couple of weeks ago, we had a school call up here as requested by the students. Once they found out their ranking, they were not having it. They needed us to come out and do some FAFSA completion events with them. So the portal is still working.
Next slide. And so basically, how did we reach our students? How did we let the students know that events would be going on? And I told you guys that we often work with different organizations, the libraries and churches and things like that. We put forth effort into doing many different avenues or working in many different avenues to make sure that our students were reached. We utilize call-outs, which is where the school would actually send out a message to the families to let them know that we would either be on campus during the school day to complete the FAFSAs with the students, letting them know what information is needed to complete the FAFSA, or if we were coming, we did oftentimes evening events and even Saturday events if requested. And so this was a way that the school would directly let their parents know that we will be coming out. And we have a very big presence on social media, and so we publish graphics across our Facebook and our Twitter and our Instagram account to let the students know what we were doing out in the community. And Dr. Cobb mentioned our text messaging, which was so amazing because we were able to text the students that had signed up in our database. Of course, that's how we got their information. We would be able to text them and let them know that, hey, we're coming out. Or if they just had questions, we had students that would say, oh, I started my FAFSA, but I have a few questions. And then we would be able to advise them that way or invite them to our FAFSA lab that we still currently have it, to our office, and we could work with them that way. And we mentioned the block party. So I'll share with you that we partnered with the library, and they allowed us to bring a DJ to the library, and we invited our students out via postcard mail-out. Ebony will speak briefly about how we identified the students that we targeted with our postcards, but we made it a fun day. We had pizza. We made it fun, and our students came out, and they were able, even the students that had completed waivers, just because you did a waiver during the school year, we host our block party events over the summer. And so if they've had a change of heart or something, to that effect, then they are able to meet us at the library, and we will work with them as well.
And so this is Ebony. So Brittany mentioned some of the things that we do. One of the things that we really do to try to really hone in on FAFSA completion, even past submission, is that we do look at error reports. So basically what we do, previously Stephanie mentioned that the graduation requirement calls for them to submit the FAFSA. For TOPS purposes, for our state scholarship program, and even for the students to receive federal aid, that FAFSA actually needs to be completed. So that means that it needs to be signed by both student and parent if they are a dependent student, which the majority of them are. So what we do is that we also, on top of everything else that we do from an outreach perspective, we also run monthly reports to identify those students that are having issues with their FAFSA. And we reach out to those students several times to let them know, hey, we have your FAFSA, but it's not signed. If you are anticipating receiving financial aid, you need to make sure that you get that signed. We send them instructions for whatever status their FAFSA is in. If there's an issue where we get feedback saying, hey, your social is wrong, or hey, it's not signed either by the parent or the student, we reach out to them to let them know this needs to be fixed. And we do get feedback from them. They're very grateful that we have let them know that there is an issue. And so that does also help with the number of FAFSAs that we're able to get completed as opposed to just submitted.
I want to add something, too, as to how this all interrelates. As Stephanie said, it's a part of a larger picture. When Ebony was describing the error reports, this also benefited us with processing from our state merit-based aid program. So when you have a student that, your social's wrong, you put your mother's social, you put your nickname on the FAFSA, it doesn't match what you have on your ACT records, which means when we are processing students for merit-based aid around the time they're getting those fee bills, right, and you don't see your credit on your fee bill coming up. For some of your most vulnerable populations, that just may mean they won't go at all because, see, I didn't get the award, when in actuality they are just one step closer to getting it if they correct the errors. When our team started working the error reports with events and with our staff out in the schools, we have set records the past 3 years in the number of students that we process for the merit-based award on the first run. This used to be something that would go all the way through August, September, and the students would check themselves into what I like to call Heartbreak Hotel. You put your nickname on your FAFSA and you put something else on your ACT, so now you're at the purge state because your fee bill doesn't have a credit for the aid and you don't have that money. Heartbreak Hotel has virtually disappeared because now we're seeing students take it seriously. We've done all across social media and all of our outreach the top 10 things you need to do to make sure that your aid is processed in a timely manner. So again, really reinforcing for students that the FAFSA is a means towards an end and not just, I filled out the form and that's all I have to do. So Brittany?
Next slide.
This is Sarah. I'm just trying to be mindful of the time since we are a few minutes over and we want to make sure we have time for Q&A. For those of you who are able to stay on the webinar over time, nothing will turn off or anything like that. We're totally fine to continue going together and we will get to as many questions as we can at the end. Many people have already submitted questions and you can also use the little thumbs up icon next to those questions to upvote those questions that you think are relevant or a question that you would like to ask, and we'll try to get to those first. But just acknowledging really quickly that we hope that folks will be able to stick on with us, and for those of you who aren't able to, we will be providing the slides in a recording after the fact. So thanks.
And really quickly, so this is just a snapshot of our actual dashboard. To let you guys know that this dashboard began when we had the NCAN grant, and at that time we looked at the schools that we serve. But now we have grown our dashboard out to look at statewide completion, and I already told you guys basically how we come up with the metrics to input into this. And then, and you guys can definitely browse. We have provided the link to that. Next slide. And this is just an overview. These were our pilot partners, and so several different agencies and entities, we came together to make sure that the pilot was successful and to build out on our best practices. And the next slide. And if you need to contact us, we've provided the Department of Education's contact information as well as how to contact our office.
All right, thank you all so much for sticking with us. We want to thank LOSFA as well as Stephanie from the Department of Education of Louisiana for participating with us today. As Sarah mentioned, we do want to get to some questions that were asked on the Q&A dialogue platform. I will kind of start with the questions that had received some of the most upvotes. For any questions we don't get to during today's session, we will try and send out some responses to those popular questions when we send out the recording as well as the slides. So our first question, has any student ever been held back from graduating high school because of this requirement in Louisiana, Illinois, or Texas? So LOSFA, would you all
that would be me. There has not been a single student who has been held back from graduating. I have a full-time staff person and 6 contract people, and we make sure at every school that every kid has a box checked. We do that at every school.
And this is Sarah. I'll just add that Illinois and Texas, while they've passed legislation, they haven't implemented yet. And so that those implementation timeframes are coming down the pike, so we don't know yet for those two.
And second question, did Louisiana, Illinois, or Texas allocate additional resources, including money, staff, implementation toolkits, etc., at the state level to assist schools and districts in implementing this statewide? And if so, how much and what kind of resources?
So from the Department of Ed standpoint, we hired a full-time professional financial aid advisor, but we have LOSFA and they are the experts. So we didn't need a whole army or staff of people because they have one and they know what they're doing way more than anybody that I know. So we had somebody to use. We already had a Louisiana office that we could use, but from the Department of Education, we hired one full-time staff person, and we do hire out between 6 and 10 contractors every year to just assist, because now there's such a request for school events that we often have to partner up with LOSFA, you know, with our own events. Sometimes it takes, you know, 4 or 5 people to man an event to get to everybody. So from our standpoint, that's what we did. We also, based on the financial aid working group's findings, created a financial aid planning webpage with resources for students and parents, including the policy and reports. And that was one of the things, if you look at the report, that the group said they wanted us to do.
Thank you. So our next question, what has been the biggest pain points for schools in implementing the Louisiana policy, as well as for parents and students in the state? So what are some of your lessons learned, things you would do differently if you had a chance to do it over?
I'll speak to one thing, you know, that we recently did a presentation with LDE and the USDOE and our team and some of our post-secondary partners at our counseling association meeting. And one of the counselors, you know, shared that, you know, she is torn oftentimes between, you know, what, you know, who everybody needs to complete the FAFSA, but she understands that sometimes, you know, there are some students that who are really not engaged. So how to spend her time on, you know, who to spend her time on. Should she engage these students or should she engage these students? You know, because some students, you know, it takes a little bit more time to encourage them or to get them on board. So that's one of the things I've heard, and I've heard that more than once, but one of the things that I've shared is definitely partnering with other organizations like ours. We have mentoring, you know, students who are staff who work with us who mentor students as well. So those partnerships and those relationships are going to be very important to support those students.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next question. If a student is opting out or getting a hardship waiver due to being undocumented or being from a mixed status family, how did you provide balance and privacy and asking or reporting the reason for opting out without outing the student in their family?
So a hardship waiver is filed by the school district, and all they have to say is they couldn't contact the parent. And we have never not approved a hardship waiver. So they don't have to state, and as a matter of fact, our staff, my staff person and my contract counselors, I am half Mexican myself. So I'm highly aware of the, undocumented situation. And so we're highly sensitive to that. And we make it clear to our counselors in all of, the Department of Education also in my department manages counselors for the state. So we make it very clear to them that if they have students in those situations, what to put on that waiver, and it will be accepted.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our next question, how many staff members did you need to conduct the number of events you all held?
It varies. It varies. And again, okay, so there are some sites. Okay, so if you're talking about events, it's going to depend on where it is and who we're targeting. If you're talking about schools, it's going to depend on how hands-on that counselor and that school staff is in terms of how we actually staff it.
We also bring in the Louisiana Association of Financial Aid Administrators from the campuses. They've been very willing to assist as well and lend their expertise. Other community-based organizations who are committed to working with the FAFSA, as Stephanie talked about earlier, it takes a group, it takes a village. If we're finding that the requests are overwhelming, then we also reach out to our partners. And one thing that we did that helped us is we have a universal calendar and scheduling. so that everybody can see what's happening, and then we know where our holes are, where we need more assistance. So it's really been an all hands on deck.
Thank you so much. So we're going to just do about 2 more questions and then save the remaining for any responses once we send out our email. So our next question, how did Louisiana frame this mandate to more affluent communities and schools who might see this as a low-income issue and not necessarily need it for their students?
I would say that the FAFSA, being the application for the state's merit-based aid, was already built in, because the FAFSA, that being already a factor, is why students were filing the TOPS online application. Again, that's going to be more affluent families. So the promise of that particular scholarship and that level of assistance that goes to quite a few affluent families was a big incentive. It's a continued incentive.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And then our final question is, high school staff, they're required to enter how the student has met the graduation requirement in the state student information system. How does that look? I believe that's the question. Please send me a message if I did not ask your question as you intended for it. So hopefully that makes sense.
So at the Department of Education, in our student transcript system, everything a child is required to have to graduate is part of that. So it is programmed. We had to pay programmers to program it into our system. So if a student fills out the FAFSA and their name comes up on the completed list, even if it comes up on the error list, that list is automatically populated into our student transcript system, and that box is checked for them, that they have completed the FAFSA requirement for graduation. The only time somebody has to go in and enter, check another box is if it's a waiver or the TOPS form. Or no, we get the list of the TOPS form too. Never mind, I'm wrong on that. LOSFA also populates those who fill out the TOPS form. So it's only in a waiver situation, because a school does have to identify if it's parental, 18-year-old opt-out, or hardship.
Thank you. So that's the final question we're going to take live. If you all are in the question dialog box, you'll see that Sarah has been responding to some of those questions and providing answers there. As mentioned before, we will be sending out the slides from this presentation, as well as answering any questions that we weren't able to get to. But we want to really thank you all for joining with us on this webinar and taking some time out of your day to engage in this topic.
No, I just would say thank you to everybody. I am super surprised at the interest in this webinar and this topic. We had a lot of registrants today, and a lot of registrants that really stuck with us the whole time. So thanks so much, and thank you so much to the Louisiana team for your partnership and providing all of this information today.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.